Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 2 of our 6-part Oath of the Gatewatch set review. So today we're going to look at all the blue cards as well as the Dimir and Izzet cards that are in the set. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, definitely a good time to do so as we go through the set review, and then we'll culminate with a pre-release primer, get you ready for that pre-release. So having said that, let's jump into the cards for today. We'll start with Obtruse Interference, and this is interesting because it's basically a 3 casting cost, 4 spike that also gives you an Eldrazi Scion. That's neat because 4 spike's an awesome card. That card is a beating if you've ever played it in some of the Eternal formats. Your opponent can just be caught off guard early in the game or late in the game when they're trying to tap out to play their win condition, and it can just be a beating. But other times, your opponent can play around it or simply accidentally play around it because they're flooding out on mana, and then it becomes a dead card. Well, in this version, if nothing else, you can still get an Eldrazi Scion token out of it, so it's not a completely dead card. So I like this. I wouldn't want 4 of these in my limited deck, but I'd be more than happy to play a couple of them. I don't really think it's going to quite get there in Standard with a 3 casting cost, but it's a very good limited counter. Next we have Ancient Crab. This is interesting. It's a 1/5 blocker for 3. I kind of wish it cost maybe a blue and 2 colorless, or maybe just a blue and a colorless. Seems a little pricey, but this card's sole purpose is a limited sideboard card to deal with some of the more aggressive decks, especially the black-red versions of the aggressive decks. You can put this out as a blocker early and be able to stay alive until you get your engine going. Next we have Blinding Drone, and so you're going to see a theme here. It's interesting because the Battle for Zendikar blue/colorless effects were all about ingest and processors, and you don't have that in Oath of the Gatewatch. You do have some cards that play well with those type of cards because you will be playing them with Battle for Zendikar, but in this set what you're going to see more of is the colorless blue cards being a little less aggressive, a little more defensive, but having some really strong abilities tacked onto them for colorless mana, and this is an example of that. What Blinding Drone is going to do for you is give you a cheap little blocker at 1/3, and don't forget Surge is also a thing, so a 2 casting cost spell is not a bad thing. And if you have colorless mana to then later pour into it, it can tap down a creature, and that can be very powerful and limited. So I don't think this is doing quite enough for Standard, but this is going to be a really good limited card, and I could see drafting or opening up my sealed pool and trying to put together a colorless/blue deck, and I think that could be a very good archetype. Next we have Comparative Analysis, and this is a instant that draws you 2 cards. Costs 4, but still at instant speed, that's actually pretty competitive. And then the fact that it has a surge cost of 3 makes it, hey, that much better. So this is going to be fine for you in limited. You'll be more than happy to play this card, and I could see this making it into Standard as well for any deck that wants to draw some cards at instant speed, especially a control deck. Next is Containment Membrane. So blue's version of removal is kind of tempo plays and tapping down creatures. This is maybe the least exciting of that type of ability because it doesn't tap the creature, it only prevents it from untapping, which means if you play it at the wrong time, your opponent can still get an attack in, or they simply can keep it up as a blocker. So you do have to be a little thoughtful when you play this card, but it has a cheap surge cost, which is kind of cool, and it's not the worst thing in the world when you need removal and you're playing limited and you're in blue. So you'll play this. It might not be super exciting, but you'll play it because you need to. Next is Crush of Tentacles. This is a mythic, and this is very sweeping. This could definitely see some Standard play just because board sweeps are a big deal. They allow you to kind of reset the game at your own pace, with you hopefully being the one to kind of set up the next couple turns. Now, if you're able to play it for the surge cost, you also get an 8/8 token out of the deal, which is pretty good. If you have a card like Expedite to give it haste, it actually becomes really good. But the only issue with that is you just swept the board back to your opponent's hand. They're probably going to be able to play some chump blockers and deal with the 8/8. However, having said that, this is still a very powerful effect. I think it's strong enough to see some Standard play, and it's going to be a bomb for you in limited for sure. It's a great panic button in limited. Cultivator Drone. And here's another one of those colorless blue cards. You get a 2/3 for 3, which is a good body for limited, and it's, I don't really want to say mana dork. It seems a little big and expensive to be called a mana dork, but it does tap for colorless mana, but you can only use it for colorless spells and abilities and such. So it's a good enabler to some of the other blue/colorless cards that are very strong that you'll see. As far as standard goes, I want to be shocked if it sees a little bit of standard play, just because I don't know how easy it's going to be to build a colorless mana base. I guess we'll see as the metagame unfolds, and this could just help with that. Other than that, though, it's still going to be a good limited card. Cyclone Sire. Now this one's just a limited card, but it's a good one. It's a 3/4 flyer for 5. You're happy to do that in limited. And when it dies, you get to basically awaken a land for 3. That's not nothing. So this is going to be pretty good. It's uncommon, so you could even get a couple of these in your deck, and it could do some work for you. Deep Fathom Skulker. So this is a little too pricey for standard, but this is a good limited card. It's another one of those colorless blue cards that has a pretty decent ability tacked onto it. So a 4/4 body, it's got built-in Curiosity on top of that, which is a nice bonus. And then if I have the mana, including the colorless mana to pump into it, I can start making this very profitable on my attack step. So watch out for this one. This could surprise you in a game of limited. Like I said, a little too pricey for standard, but good limited card. Dimensional Infiltrator. So this one's a little more aggressive. It feels a little more like the Battle for Zendikar blue Devoid cards than it does the Oath ones, but that's okay because it's kind of nice to get a little bit of an aggressive touch into some of these blue cards. This one's a 2/1 flyer with flash, and this can do some early damage to your opponent, which is kind of nice. And it also plays really well with the ingest mechanic from Battle for Zendikar, because it does allow you to exile cards from the top of your opponent's library, as long as you have the colorless mana to pump into it, which will play very well with processors from the previous set. So this is actually pretty good in that case. Probably not going to see any standard play or anything like that, but it's a pretty economical card for you in limited, especially if you have some processors. Gift of Tusks. So I mentioned it a little bit briefly here and there, but there's a lot of cheap spells in the Izzet colors that really play very nicely with Surge, and this is definitely one of them. And it's also a versatile card on its own. For 1 blue, you get to perhaps do a nice little combat trick and make one of your creatures 3/3. You can deal with an ability on a creature for a turn. You can do a little bit of extra damage attacking in if that's what you need to do. So it can do a lot of different things, but probably the most important thing it can do is enable Surge costs. Surge is a really cool mechanic. I'm really excited about it. It's bonkers if you're playing Two-Headed Giant in the pre-release, so watch out for it there. But even in one-on-one matchups, it can be enabled by a lot of these 1-drops, and we'll see a lot more as we keep going. Gravity Negator, and this one is a little expensive at 4, so it's a little pricey for standard, but this is a great limited card. You get a 2/3 flyer, which is just fine in limited, but the fact that if you have a colorless mana, you can make another creature fly. If you have a big Eldrazi or something like that, imagine just giving it flying and just getting in there. This will be really fun, I think, to mess around with in limited, and it's at the common level, which is nice, so there'll be a lot of opportunities to use this. Grip of the Royal. So this is a limited tempo card, but it's a pretty good one because you get to tap down a creature. It doesn't untap on the next step, which is good. It has a Surge cost of 2, which makes it better, and it cantrips, which makes it even better. So I would be more than happy to play this. I like the effects that tap down to 2 creatures, like the sleep type effects, but it more than makes up for the fact that you have the Surge cost that's cheap and the cantrip. So this is a very good limited card. Hedron Alignment. This card makes me smile. So first off, let's talk about limited. If I'm playing maybe a Converge / Multicolor ally strategy with Cohort or Support or something like that, I might want this in my deck because the Scry effect might be really good to help me hit my colors and hit my lands and the cards that I need. So yeah, it has a purpose in limited, even if it's a very limited purpose. I could see it being part of a certain strategy in limited. As far as its main ability goes, it's not going to make standard. There is a legacy combo you can do with this. I think you can actually win the game on turn 3 if everything goes your way. But I gotta ask myself, is it worth it? Because there are like 2-card combos in Legacy that you could be playing that are actually easier to pull off than this one. Now, I'd like to see someone brew it. I'd like to see if it could get there in Legacy. That'd be really cool, but I don't know. What this card I think is more for is just kitchen table magic. I mean, sitting down, trying to like brew something casual, kind of surprise your friends, and there's something to be said about that. A lot of times we don't think about those things when we're evaluating cards, but a lot of the best times I've had playing Magic is just brewing just crazy stuff that never really work in a competitive format. So that's what this card's for, I think, and hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Jacques Isle Avenger, and this is a fantastic limited card. Now, I think it's a little inconsistent to make it there in Standard because you really want to be playing this for the surge cost and not for 5. But if you're playing this in Limited, even for 5, it's still okay for a 3/3 flyer, but the surge cost just makes it bonkers. Very good limited beater. Negate. So Negate's been reprinted a lot recently. We keep seeing this card keep showing up, and it's a good card. It's still a good card. So there's not a whole lot more I can say about it. It's the type of card that you can play it in Limited. A lot of times it's in your sideboard at the beginning, and then you just board it in if you're going up against a lot of non-creature spells. As far as Standard goes, yeah, it sees Standard play. It's going to continue to see Standard play, especially in control decks. Oath of Jace. I like this card a lot, actually. Drawing 3 cards and discarding 2 cards is a pretty big deal. This is good in Limited. This is good potentially in Standard, again in a control build. What's also interesting about this is you get to dump some cards in your graveyard. So, Shadows over Innistrad's coming up. I wonder if there's going to be some relevance there. So this card actually might get better. And you notice that there's a few cards in the set that kind of play around with dumping stuff in the graveyard, and we know that's going to be relevant this spring. So keep an eye out for that. As far as the scryability goes, that's good too. If you have a Planeswalker, there's nothing wrong with that. So even if you don't have a Planeswalker, this is a good card, but if you have one, it gets even better. Next is Overwhelming Denial, and I think this is a really good card. It's interesting because I had to think about it for a little bit, but look at it this way. Let's say I'm about to cast something really big, and I cast it. It hasn't resolved yet, but I have already cast it. My opponent counters it. And now if I have 2 blue mana, I can counter that counter, and that counter cannot be countered. I think I said that right. So that's actually a beating. That's kind of awesome. And because of that in itself, I can see this getting some modern play. This is definitely Standard playable, and it's still going to be good for you in Limited as well. Now, having said that, it's maybe not quite as good on your opponent's turn. When it's not your turn, you don't have as much control over it. I mean, you still play an instant to get the search cost, or you could just hold 4 mana up, and it's a 4 mana counterspell, which isn't super good, but I think I would take that downside considering how much upside you have on your turn, just how much protection that could offer for you. Very interesting card. Watch out for this one. This could surprise you, but I do think this is going to see a lot of play. Prophet of Distortion, and this is a card that borderline could see some Standard play, and here's why. First off, it's a 1-drop. It enables Surge. It also gives you a little bit of play early in the game if you're a control deck, but also in the late game, as long as you have some colorless mana, you can just start pumping this to draw cards. That's actually kind of awesome. So this could make it into Standard. It's definitely a great Limited card, and I have no issue playing it Limited at all. Roiling Waters. Now, this is too expensive for Standard, and it's probably not splashy enough for most Commander decks, quite honestly, but this is a very good Limited card. For 7 mana, if you have one of these in your deck, I wouldn't want more than one, but if you have one and you can return 2 creatures that your opponent controls to their hand and draw 2 cards, that's kind of awesome. So I would definitely be more than happy to do that. I also like the way it's worded, that its target player draws 2 cards, so you can potentially get different value out of it in a 2-headed giant matchup. So very cool design. Slip Through Space, another 1 casting cost card. Imagine that. This is a devoid, and it cantrips, and target creature can't block this turn. Can be very relevant, especially in a more aggressive build, which you'd see with maybe if you're playing more of the Battle for Zendikar blue cards. But very good card, and again, it does what we want it to do. It enables Surge. Sphinx of the final word. This is your control deck's finisher. So that control deck I've been talking about that's going to exist, I'm sure, this is going to be how it wins games. It's just a big creature that's incredibly hard to deal with. A 5/5 flyer that's hexproof. It can't be countered. It also makes your other instant sorceries uncounterable. That's crazy. So this will be in those decks in some quantity, maybe a 1 of or 2 of, but it will be there, and that's how it's going to win. Needless to say, this is a bomb in Limited. I don't know. It would be hard to lose once you get this into play, although possible. Next is Sweep Away, and this is another pretty high value kind of tempo card. It's an instant, which is great, and if the creature's attacking you, it goes, instead of to the owner's hand, to the top of the library, which is huge tempo play. So not a standard card probably, but really good limited card. Thought Harvester. So again, this is another card for limited, but it does a couple things for you. It plays around with the processors if you're playing with those cards from Battle for Zendikar, which is kind of nice. But even if you're not, it's still a 2/4 flyer for 4. That's okay. As far as limited goes, especially this format, we've seen a lack of flyers, so getting a couple flyers out there can be quite good. Amora Entangler, and this doesn't look super powerful when you first look at it, but it only costs 2, which does help with Surge, and it is an ally, so you do have some synergies with things like Cohort or Rally. They're kind of nice, and then it has prowess on top of that. So this isn't going to make it into standard, obviously, but there are some limited decks that will want this because of its synergies with other cards. Not all decks. In fact, most of the time it probably won't make your cut, but there are some times where you'll like to have this, so don't forget about it. Unity of Purpose. So this is the only blue support card, but more importantly, this is a really nice combat trick, actually. If you're able to give some things some counters then untap them, that's actually kind of awesome. So cost 4 is a little pricey. You don't necessarily want to be holding back 4 mana all the time, but I don't mind playing maybe 1 of this in a limited deck. Void Shatter. So this is basically Dissipate with Devoid, which is actually kind of interesting. Dissipate's a very old card, originally printed in Mirage, has been reprinted a number of times since then. Has seen play in Standard over the years, has seen play in Eternal formats. What's interesting about this card is because it has Devoid and it isn't subject to being a blue card, then it can't be countered by things like Red Elemental Blast or Pyroblast. So that makes it sort of interesting when it comes to the World of Eternal formats. So you basically, if you're running Dissipate, you just want to swap it out for this card. As far as standard goes, there's a lot of good counterspells out there right now, so I don't know if this one's needed. Maybe as things rotate out, perhaps this will see some play, but keep an eye on it. It could see a little bit of play here and there, but for the most part, I don't know if it'll be a huge mover right now anyway in standard. As far as limited goes, it's good. Limited counterspell only costs 3, and it plays nicely with some processors if you're on that game plan from Battle for Zendikar. So keep an eye on this one. Actually, pretty good limited card. Now let's move on to some of the multicolor. Here's the first card. It's Izzet, Jori, and Rune Diver. And obviously this is meant to play along with Surge. And even if you're not big into Surge, if you have some cheap spells, this can give you some value. And it's still a 2/3 body for 3. It's just a very strong limited card. And I think this would be kind of fun to toss into some commander decks too. A lot of commander decks, you'll be playing things like Mana Rocks. You play the Mana Rock, then you cast another spell that turn, get some value off it. I could see that being very good in those examples. I'm not so sure about standard. Maybe it could fit into a control build to help draw some extra cards, but the control decks are usually kind of holding on to their mana and saving it for counterspells and tempo plays and stuff, so it might not be quite as good there, but it definitely has a place in limited and some other formats like Commander. Next is Mind Melter, and this is possibly standard playable. It's that good, and the reason I say that, it only costs 3. It's a 2/2, and it can't be blocked, which really works well in a control deck. It just doesn't care what the other player's doing. It's just still getting in there for damage. And on top of that, it has a very black effect of being able to force your opponent to exile a card from their hand as long as you have the mana to pump into it. So this is quite interesting. It's definitely a bomb and limited. I'd have no issue playing it there, but watch out for this one. It could see a little standard play too. And finally, our last card of the day is Storm Chaser Mage. It's an Izzet card. This has it all. Flying, haste, prowess. It's a 1/3. This is intriguing to me because, first off, in limited, it's a good limited card. You'll get some value out of it playing it for just 2 mana, especially if you can play a surge spell after it. But it gets in there for point of damage right away with haste. You can prowess and pump it periodically. I like the value you get out of this card in limited. Having said that, it's cheap enough that it could see some standard play for sure. And then when you start looking at things like modern, there are some endless loop combos out there where, because this creature has haste and prowess, you can protect it by keeping it in your hand until you're ready to go off. Then you can play the card, activate your loop, and attack in with the prowess triggers and perhaps win the game. Maybe. So I like to see someone brew that up in modern. I think that could be very interesting. So keep an eye on this one. This one could have some legs, could make it into eternal formats. It's an uncommon, which is good. It's not a rare. So keep an eye on this one. Having said that, those are the blue cards as well as some of the multi-cards for today. We will be back with our next video. We're going to take a look at all the black cards in Oath of the Gatewatch. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.